Using the Battle for the Ark Buildable Master Chief set to convert the Falcon from the Falcon Sweep set into a Halo mech has to have been my biggest challenge yet. But hopefully you guys will agree it was worthwhile. Let's find out. I'm Brickman117, welcome back to the channel. Straight off the bat, I knew this was going to be a challenging build because the green in the Falcon Sweep set is different to that of the Battle for the Ark statue. So straight away, all of the green pieces from the Battle for the Ark set are more than likely not going to be usable. You can use some of the parts if they're buried within the build so you can't see them, but I don't want any of that lighter green showing through the mock because it will just ruin the illusion that the mech has transformed from the Falcon and parts only from that Falcon. With this in mind, I decided to tackle the hardest part of the build first, which is the head. Reason being, I can't use the head from the buildable Chief because it's the wrong color, so I have to create something myself, and I really wanted a Spartan looking helmet, which is easier said than done when you're limited to the parts in the sets, not just grabbing any old part from wherever you can find it. So I created the lower jaw first, and then I created the upper section. I wanted this black section coming out over the top of the helmet. It's got that kind of Centurion look to it. And then as for the visor, I just couldn't come up with anything. So I went with these two black pieces in the end, which when it's all put together, it kind of looks like eyes, kind of looks like a visor, very robotic like, but it truly was the best I could do. It ended up taking me nearly 3 hours to finalize just the head. It was by far the longest part of the build. Once it's all together with those two bits, you can see it definitely starts to take shape. I'm really happy with the side profile of the helmet. I'm not 100% on the size of it. It's bigger than I wanted it to be, but I just couldn't get the detail I wanted when I was reducing it in size. So in the end, I just had to settle for a big-headed robot, but it is what it is. So here we go. I also added some side parts on just to bulk the side of the head out to make the helmet look more round, because I didn't want it to be too skinny, even though it is effectively a robot, so you don't even need a head if you don't want to, but it's just for show. And I thought it looked better with these side bits on, so as I said, I just bulked it out. Once I'd got those on, the only bits I wanted to add was these sloped tiles for the side of the jaw, and I used these on the Phantom build as well, and I just think these slope pieces on the side really finish this helmet off. They make it look really robotic, that very angular jawline. So one of those on either side, and I finally decided I was going to leave it here. It's the first thing I made because I wanted all the parts at my disposal. So eventually I figured that was enough, 3 hours, let's move on to something else, see if I can actually create the rest of the build before spending any more time on this helmet. Next up, I moved on to the torso, and I started by stripping off all the green from the original Master Chief build, widening the shoulder ball joints by pushing them out 2 studs either side, and lifting the neck joint up by a block and a plate. This helped offset the size of the head, and it also allowed me to implement the backpack, which as you can see is basically the top of the Falcon, almost unchanged. I just modified the back of the torso so that section of the Falcon would bolt straight on and it was nice and secure. Once that was done, I moved on to detailing, and I started by adding some more black to the actual torso to act as like the undersuit. So once the armor was on, you weren't seeing exposed studs underneath it. So I started by putting some of these wedge pieces in to act as the chest undersuit. And then I moved on to the rib cage. There's lots of black pieces in the Falcon set, which came in very handy for this part of the build. Once I was happy I had enough of the exposed studs covered, I then moved on to the armor. And I started at the top by creating the upper chest armor. And it's also a good point to say I'm going to show a lot of these pieces to the camera because of how many questions and comments I get either via email or in the section as to can I create instructions. I don't actually have time to do instructions at the moment, but by showing you some of the build process you should be able to get a good idea if you wanted to try and have a go yourself. Then I added some seats either side of the neck joint, 1 to cover up more studs, and 2 it really helps the chest armor flow into the backpack very nicely, plus it just screams Transformers, so I always like to add things like that. I then added the hard points or the connecting points for the guns that hang off the back of the Falcon. I'll add those later. And then I added the hubs that take the blades from the Falcon. I don't know what those are called. I added them in here for no other reason than detail. I just thought it'd be nice to have those as a feature. They had to feature somewhere, even if they don't serve a direct purpose other than cosmetic. I then added a number of additional slope bricks to the torso, which would allow me to attach more parts for detailing for the side of the rib cage and the front of the armor. As you can see on the side of the rib cage, I used the intakes from the engines on the top of the Falcon. I just thought these rounded pieces worked really well as the side of his torso. So I attached one of those either side. And then when it came to the rest of the armor, I simply put some wedge plates with tiles on top to give it that classic V-shaped Spartan look. Now that I was happy with the torso from the front and the side, I got to work on the best part of the torso, the back. I knew it was going to give me the opportunity to implement lots of those classic Falcon design features. If I got it right, would really sell this as a Falcon transformed. I started by adding a few more black pieces to cover up some exposed studs, and then I added these green sloped bricks to act as hard points for the blades that I intended to attach later on. I also had these long sloped pieces to hand, which I couldn't think of a place else to use on the build, so I decided to use them with these black angled plates to trail off the bottom half of the jetpack, which once I'd installed them instantly felt like it was a good look for this mock. And then from there I had to come up with a way to attach the blades. I didn't want them in their position they are on the Falcon. I wanted them all closed down, so hanging downwards, and this was the best way I could come up with. As you can see, I've just used pins into these pieces that hold the wings on the original Falcon, and then I used some of the very small black pins to hold all of these pieces together, which actually worked out really well because it allows you to adjust the direction of each blade, so you can have them all splayed out like angel wings, or you can have them resting down in a much more closed position. I then added the guns to the shoulder mounts, which can be posed in all manner of positions, up, down, or even tucked away when not in use. And then the one final part that absolutely had to make an appearance on the torso was, that's right, the canopy. I couldn't not use the canopy piece, and on this particular mock, the only place I found that I could actually use it and it looked okay was on the back of the torso rather than the front, which I usually do. Once I positioned it on the back, I actually thought it looked really, really good, and it just suited this style of mech. So I ended up being really, really pleased with how the torso worked out. The only problem now was I still had to build legs and arms and weapons, and in this build, seriously low on parts. It didn't leave me a lot of options. Let's see how I got on with that. The problem I had when it came to the legs was I knew I wasn't going to have enough parts to create fully fleshed out legs, so I decided to cheat. I decided to create bare bones cybernetic lower legs, which I know sounds strange because it's a mech, but bear with me. The landing skids from the original Falcon worked perfectly for the lower legs of this mock. They may look odd now and underdeveloped, but when you see it finished, it actually pulls the look off pretty nicely. It also allowed me to create very basic feet to attach to them too. They used up very few parts, but more importantly, they used up another key part feature of the Falcon, which for me is what these builds and challenges are all about. Once I had the design of the lower leg finalized, I was then able to move on to the upper leg, which I thankfully had enough parts to fully flesh out. And it even allowed me to utilize some of those beautiful printed tiles you get with the Falcon, just to once again hammer home the fact that this is a Falcon transformed. And once the upper leg is attached to the lower leg, you can really see now how I think it works, as if it's just got lower prosthetic legs. And although not intentional and forced by lack of parts, I feel like it actually gives this mock a unique twist, having this aspect to it, and something to keep in mind for future builds. With the legs taken care of, all I had to do now was try not to screw up the arms. So I started by increasing the length in the hope they'd be better proportioned to the rest of the build. I also managed to incorporate more of those key Falcon details with the number 23 tile on his upper arm, as well as those beautifully printed tail fins. For the forearms, I ran into a slight problem where I couldn't have two hands because of the parts used for the hands on the buildable Chief are metallic green, and I didn't want to use those. There's only one alternative in black that comes with the Falcon, so I opted to create a gun arm for his left arm. He's got no hand, it's just a gun. I don't know what the gun is or what it does. I just wanted to put something together that looked cool. So as you can see, I was pretty much using any parts I had left that would do the job. And as far as doing the job goes, I think it looks all right. As for the right arm, I wanted to create an actual forearm with a hand. I also wanted to incorporate the display from the cockpit of the Falcon. I always like to do that somewhere on these builds. So I put that on his forearm as a kind of tack pad for him to get information from. Custom built a hand for that arm. And then because he had a hand, I felt he had to have a weapon. I couldn't give him the assault rifle that comes with the buildable Chief because I'd used most of the parts elsewhere for the build. So I decided to have a go at creating a Magnum. And whilst it's definitely not the best, I think it pulls off as a Magnum. There's definitely some sketchy build techniques there, but ultimately, from a distance, I think it looks pretty cool. So there we go, that's all the parts. It's time to put them together and see what it looks like. And there you have it, the UNSC Falcon Mech. I know I've said this many times before, but I think this may be my new favourite mech. I love the colour of this. I love that dark green and black. We don't see a lot of this from Mega anymore. So it was nice to be able to create something using this colour in modern parts, especially with all those printed pieces. Yes, I know his head is slightly larger than I would like it to be too, but we don't body shame here, so please refrain from filling the comments section with comments like big head. But if you can look past the size of the head, I think everything else here has worked out all right. I'm really pleased with the way those lower legs worked out. The shape of those skids from the Falcon really lend themselves towards the shape of lower legs, so that worked out really well, and I think it's quite well balanced with the upper legs and the rest of the build. The back section I'm over the moon with. I just think it looks absolutely fantastic, and the canopy just protruding out above that just is the icing on the cake. Absolutely over the moon with it. I'm really pleased with the Magnum. To say I was struggling to come up with a weapon, I think the small weapon suits this kind of build. I think this mech is more of a lightweight reconnaissance mech rather than a heavy duty tank mech like the Scorpion mech I built or the Phantom Hunter mech that I built. So not that I need to ask you, but I'm sure you will anyway. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't worry, I will be producing a comparison video soon where I'll line all the mechs up together so you can see how they compare in size against one another. But until then, as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.